First thing that we want to do when we're writing the JavaScript for the MadLib project is to store a reference to all of the objects that we will be modifying inside our page. So to do that, I need to use query selector to grab a hold of pretty much everything that has an ID on it. So we can see we have all of these different IDs. So I'm going to grab those elements so that I can do something with it. So with that, I can say let my input panel be equal to document.query selector. And now the item I'm going to get, it's an ID, so I use the hashtag, and then I'll use its name. So that now stores a reference to the input panel. Now I'm going to repeat this process for all of the other elements that I'll be working with on my project. And it makes sense when we're doing this to write our code in blocks so that I set my variables first, and then I'm going to write my event listeners. Then I'm going to have the functions that are going to do the magic or the actions, the activity on my page. So after the first one, it's just copy, paste, change the relative wording on it. So output warning, then submit, and again the buttons, then my 3 input fields, and then the story, the paragraph that we're going to change when it's all said and done. So you can reorder these in whatever order you want, but this now gives us access to everything that we are going to need on our document. So it's a good idea if you know you're going to be accessing things and you've given them appropriate names or either IDs or classes. Write out the JavaScript to store a reference to those pieces of your document. Because if we don't have a connection to them, we can't do anything with either their contents or properties. Now that we have a reference to all of our objects, we need to find a way to have those objects do something. So now I want my button to do something. So I will start out with my submit button because that's the first one, and type add event listener. That allows it to listen for my click event. And when I call the click event, then I want to, ideally we want to, after we click, we want to check to make sure that the user has filled in all of the form fields. And if they've filled in all the form fields, then we want to write the story. So we have two options because we're not going to check until we get the base part of it working. We could just immediately go to write story, or we could call our validation function, which is called check complete, and then check complete can call write story. So we could go either way with that. But right now I think we'll just go with the direct route and we'll immediately just call write story. So we call that, and then we say false. It's not going to bubble the event. So that now sets up our submit button. The again button is going to listen for a click event as well. And this time, the button, instead of calling write story, is going to reset the page. And again, this is an event that does not need to bubble. So if I save this and test my document, well, there's not a lot to test yet, but I should see that there are no error messages. So it's not a bad idea to do that. So here's my document. There's no error messages. I can click on the button. I can go down and click on the other button, and nothing's happening because those functions don't do anything. But they also are not causing error messages. If I want to verify my functions are working, an easy way to do that would be to log out a statement. So it's console.log, or you just type log and code complete, hit return. And I'll just type write story here. And on the other one, I will say reset page. Save this. Now if I click on submit, I should see in the console it spews out write story. Click again, calls reset page. So that is now a clue to me that my buttons are working. It's also why we should always keep the console up, because if we ever see something that is red, that's causing an error. So if I were to take out a word there, we can see it's giving me a reference there. It says writ story is not defined at line number 82. So I go find line 82 and go, oh, look, I mistyped it and forgot to put the E in. So use the messages in the console to help you. So that's one error we could see. Now, another thing is if I spell the name of my button wrong, it says uncut reference, summit not defined, again at line 82, because that's the one I'm wrecking. And I can see what it says. Oh, it didn't say submit because I mistyped it. And now it says submit, save, no error messages. Both buttons are working, so things are good. To write the story, what we want to do is we want to populate the contents of our story paragraph. So the paragraph is the story. So we have this paragraph, the story. Its current contents are junk at the moment. Now in a production piece, you probably wouldn't want to put that there, because then if someone looks at it and something fails, it's going to see the word junk and they'll be like, wow, that's really bad. Instead, just let it be nothing, and that's probably going to be a little bit better, because then at least it's empty, it's not offensive. Story, what we need to do to make it easy is we're going to create a variable to hold a reference to the story as we're writing it. So I'm doing it an empty string first. So it's now just, it's the start of a string, and then we're going to start populating it with the contents of what we have. And the way that we can do this is we can add to finished story. Now we have learned over the years through trial and error that if I just set finished story equal to a bunch of text and throw my variable name and a bunch more text, and it becomes paragraphs and paragraphs long, all kinds of good content. If it gets too long, it fails. So it's better to keep adding short chunks to it, and then that's going to work better. So what I could do is say welcome. Now space, close out my quotes there, and now I will add in. First name, of course, is the name of that form field that they filled in, and I will use the value. And then plus, and then I'll close it out with a period here. So now that I've done that, we're just going to start with this. Whenever you're building your project, we should always try and do just a little bit test, instead of do everything in one shot. Because if we do that and then it breaks, we don't know where we broke it without doing a lot of detective work or trying to work backwards from that. So now the story, and with this we can do it in one of two ways. We can set the text content of this paragraph, or as we talked about previously, we could set the inner HTML. That allows us to also pass in HTML tags with this. So if we wanted to insert additional paragraphs and things like that, we could. Another option is inside our story, if we know that we're going to have multiple paragraphs and we want to populate those paragraphs with the contents of the form field, I could set up those paragraphs up here. So I could have story paragraph 1, story paragraph 2, story paragraph 3. Of course, we would have to get a hold of them all with query selector statements, because each would be its own separate thing. And then we could write to each paragraph, and that would be a perfectly acceptable way to do it. So the story's text content is going to be equal to finish story. So now we have our form field. We're grabbing the value from it. We're going to populate it into that. So let's save this. Go over to this. I can now type in a name and hit submit. And it crashed on line 94. So let's go into line 94. And I said finish story, quote, welcome. My equal sign here, let's save this. Try again. Put my name in. Submit. And now we can see it populated it and changed the contents of that form field. If I don't want this top paragraph to be here, if I don't like that, I can get rid of it. That's just a placeholder just to kind of give us context. If I want to style it, I could put a class or an ID on it. I could reference it separately in my CSS, give it a different look and feel. It's all good. Got the first name in here. Now what I can do is go, and this is my preferred way of doing it, is every time I'm going to add the contents of one of my input fields, I like to do it on a new line. So that's going to then add to it. Oh, sorry. This should not be equals, because if I do equals, well, we'll see what happens here, and then I'll show you why. So now I'm going to grab my fave color field's value. And this time I will be ending my sentence with a question mark. So now if I save this, asking for a name, asking for the color. If I go over here, put in a name, and then we'll say blue. And now if I submit my answer, I will just say, well, see, it says, why do you like the color blue? It didn't keep my first statement because previously where I screwed up and I forgot the equal sign in the first place, it was supposed to be plus equals, so every time I do plus equals. And now when I do that, if I type those in, we will see, welcome Fred, why do you like the color blue? Well, notice that there's no space between the period and why. So what that tells me is I need to do one of two things. I need to either put the space after the period here or before why. So I don't like having the space at the beginning of the sentence, so I will put a space after that period. It also tells me I probably need to put a space after the question mark because I'm going to repeat this process a third time. So this time I'll use plus equals once more. So I hear my place.value is a nice spot to visit, period. So now it's set up. I can enter in my 3 form fields, add it to the text, add that text to my story. So if I save it, refresh, submit my answer, we can see. Now, one of the things that does happen during MadLibs is if you're not careful, if you ask for places that are singular versus plural, sometimes then the language doesn't quite flow, and there's always an awkwardness that happens to it depending on what answer people provide. So at this point, our project is kind of working. That you want to have multiple paragraphs as part of your thing. It is still recommended that we do not set up or use inner HTML. We should use text content because that does prevent any bad input coming from a form. So knowing that, we'll use text content. So what I can do is I'm going to have two more elements. I'll have the story 2 and the story 3. I'll just leave the story as is. Could always put a 1 on it if it makes you happy to have it that way. With those 3 paragraphs in place, I now need to access them through JavaScript. So I need to set it up where I add in the 2, add in the 3. So I have the story 2, the story 2, the story 3, the story 3. So now I have access to those items. Again, depending on the length of your project, we could recycle this multiple times. So, or I could set up 3 more or 2 more variables to store the other story. It really is, it's flexible as how you want to do it. Because I could reuse it and say finished story is equal to this, set the text content of the story equal to finished story, then say finished story is now not plus equal but equal to the next statement, and the story 2's text content is that. But I believe I would prefer, so I'm going to add 1, 2, and 3 onto each of these. This is going to be 1, this is going to be 2, this will be 3. And we have 2 and 2, 3 and 3. So now I've set up each paragraph and its contents. If I have a longer story, so finished story 1, so I can reuse, wrong key. And forgot a plus right here. So I could reuse that. So finish story 1. Now as you're doing this, if you want to add in extra returns to space things out to make it easier to see what's going on, there's no reason not to do that. Extra line spaces only help with legibility. They do not add to file size, and they don't impair the processing of your code. So we could set it up in this manner if we have multiple paragraphs. I go back into my project. So type some answers in, submit, and I'll see now I've populated all 3 paragraphs, and they are all separate. In the first one where I reused the form field, and there's nothing to say you can't use the form inputs in more than one place, so I could use the name multiple times in different paragraphs. I could use any of the other inputs in different paragraphs. It's all based on how you write your story using the text input. With this, we now need to set it up so that I only see this first panel when it begins. I see the second panel when I do my output, and then when I click again, I want it to then go back and reset it. So the first thing that we need to do with this is, before we start working the functions, is I want to take my output panel and I want to set its class name to be equal to, and the class name that I'm going to put on it will be displaynone. So it goes away. Now if I save this, I'll see that it went away. I also want to make the warning go away because that red is bothering me, so I will repeat the same process and say warning. Whoop. Don't let that code completion happen. Warning's class name is going to be equal to displaynone. Now if I save this, we'll see it's now looking a whole lot better. So now we're in good shape, but if I run it, I'm not going to be able to see my input panel there, and I need to make some things change. So when I go and run this, I've updated what finished story is. So with this, I want to take my input panel, set its class name to be equal to display none. My output panel, and I'll set its class name to be equal to display block. So that will make the input go away, and it will then show the output. So if I save this, no error messages, good. Type in a name. Get my text in there, submit my answers, and now I can see I wrote the answers and made it go away. Now if I hit again, nothing is happening because I have not defined reset page. So when I am going to reset the page, I'll grab these two items and I'll put those down there, but I need to flip-flop which is which. So this becomes display block and this becomes display none. So now I can save it. Type some stuff in. And we can see it's working, but my answers are still populated. So when I go back to my input panel, I want the answers to be empty, so it's set to redo the project. To clear out my form field inputs, I'll set the value of each to be equal to an empty string. So that's just two quotes, nothing in it. So that gives me my first name. Grab my favorite colors value. I'll set that equal to empty quotes. And finally, I will grab my places value. Set that equal to empty quotes as well. So when I reset the page, that resets those items. Now I can try again and enter in a name. Got my text there. I hit again, it goes away. Now if I hit submit, see that now we have a problem, because now I have emptiness in my story, because the text it's putting there, it's not checking to find out if anything was there in the first place. We ask questions in programming by saying if inside there we put the question of if something is true, that will be, so if something is true, or if something is equal to something, so if something is true, then we want to do something. And that something is true is what we have to ask. Now, when we are asking questions in programming, if something is equal to something, we use two equal signs. We use a single equal sign when we are setting something equal to something. So what we care about, we'll start out with the first one and say if first name dot value, and this is where we're able to do a check. What we want to find out is if it's not empty. So what we don't want is we don't want it to be equal to empty string. So, because if it's equal to empty string, then we want to send out a warning. We want to change the text of the warning paragraph. So we have this warning paragraph that we made hide. Paragraph ID warning. Please answer all questions. We want to change its text content. So we could just show it, but we could also say, hey, provide your name. But for now, we're going to leave it like that. So if the first name is empty, warning, I'm going to keep doing that. Warning's class name is going to be equal to display block. Now if I save this, run it, first name, it is empty, because that's just placeholder text, there's nothing there. So if I submit my answers, nothing happened. Change our order. I'm going to just leave the old one there for reference, though I don't need it anymore. And I'll call check complete. Now I'm just going to save this for a moment. Load the page. Now first name is empty. If I click submit your answers, we can see that it now added in that warning. Okay. Now what we can do is go else. So if first name's value is empty, it makes warning go to display block. Else, it's going to call the function write story. So try and run it. Okay, fine. If I put something in here, nope. Here, nope. But if I go into the first name, submit, it works. Now when I hit again, I've got a small snag. Set page is a nice place that I can go about doing it, where I can just say warning class name is going to be equal to display none. Because when I reset the page and go back, whether the warning was there before or not, we don't need to see it. So it can just that guarantees warning will be gone. So now if I run it, if I try and run it, okay, error message, submit, there it is, hit again, goes away, it's been cleared. So we're making progress here. But it doesn't care about color and place yet. So we can modify our check in a couple of different ways. We can make it provide very specific messages instead of the generic please answer all questions. It's also possible that we could add in an additional style and we could change the form fields that we haven't filled in, where we could change their background color. We could change their text color to give them a warning. But we can also just change the message where it's going to go through the form fields in order. So if you don't provide text, then it can say warning dot text content is going to be equal to please provide a name. Now if I save it, try and run it, it says please provide a name. So now if I put in a name and run it, it works. Go here. But what I can do is I can now repeat this process a few times. No, I think it's going to actually just be easier to go else if and then we need one more else if as well. Else if like this. So we'll have 3, and each time we will provide text, but this time it'll be please tell me your favorite color. And finally, please provide a location or place or whatever you want to call it. Now I need to go into the ifs here, and this would be fav color is equal to empty, else if place dot value is equal to empty, and under fav color I did forget the dot value. So if first name is empty, we get this message. If favorite color is empty, we get this next message. If place is empty, we get the final message here. If all of those check out, then and only then will it call write story. Now, if you have 50 form fields that you're working on doing this with, it gets to be really tedious to have the 50 warning messages, and there could be probably a cleaner or more efficient way of doing it. And it also becomes tedious when you are testing it, having to fill in all your form fields. So you'll often just hit A a bunch of times and then hit go. But now we can try. Okay, that failed. Enter in a name. Now we want a color. Enter in a place. Now if I add in a place but get rid of a color, now we're back to it shows me a color if we have a color and not a name. So we can see it now knows. Now if I have 2 empty, it's going to key off the first one first. So that's how this works. I'm willing to live with that without trying to write something that's more complex code-wise. To add in some of the niceties that we have, so we took care of at the beginning, we made our panels, so then we hit the output panel, hit the warning panel, so we don't want to see that. We also want to set the focus. We'll set the focus on first name, and we use the focus method, so we just go first name dot focus, and then I can save this, go to my page, and I'll see now when the page loads immediately that first form field is focused, so I can type something, hit tab to work my way through the items. So if I don't want to pick up a mouse while I'm filling in my form, I can make that go really quick, and I can even tab to my button. And what would be really nice is being able to then click on the button and hit enter. If I tab through my form fields, the button is currently active. I hit return or enter on the keyboard. It's the same as clicking on it, and that is based on accessibility. But if I'm in a different form field and hit return or enter, nothing happens. So we're going to code for that event to add in that additional functionality. So to do that, we're going to be adding another event listener. Now the event listener we're working with this time is not tied to any specific button on screen because we're going to be looking for a key press. And what I will say is window, add event listener. And the reason we use window instead of document is keystrokes are recorded to the window level, not to the document, not to individual elements on screen. They don't get to say, I want to be the one who knows about the keystroke. It's the window that knows about keystrokes happening. And now the key event we can look for, we can just use key down as part of it. And now with this, when I press key down, I'm going to call a key down handler function. And I haven't created it yet, so now we have to add that in. So my window registers the event of key down. What we want to know is when that happens, I want to know, try again, function key down handler. The key down handler, I want to know do something when the enter key is pressed. Now that do something that we want to have happen, we need to know what key was pressed. Fortunately, we're able to do that in programming languages, and we are looking at the key code of the event that we're now registering. So we want to know the key code. Handler, we want to do something when the enter key is pressed. Enter key is key code 13. 12, 13. All right. So to do this, we need to ask that question and say, if the key code of the event of pressing this down. Now, to do that, we need to register the parameter of this. So inside this function, we have to put in a parameter. In this case, we can use either the letter E or EVT or EVENT. So the letters we're putting in here, I'm going to use EVT because it's not an actual word, corresponds to the event. So when I press this key, that's an event. So if the event key code is equal to 13, we'll check and see if the story is complete. I'm also going to, just before I check that, I'm going to just log out a message. I'll just say enter pressed. Now, if I don't put it inside this key code, I could say I'm going to log out the event key code. So that's going to give me the number of whatever key is being pressed. So now if I save this, if I hit A, we can now see over in the console I get 65. If I hit left arrow, 37, up, right, down, 37, 38, 39, 40, S, D, W. So each key I'm putting in here, it's telling me what number is part of that key. If I hit return or enter, I should see 13 followed by the warning. If I put a letter in for color, tab to that. Instead of tabbing once more and hitting enter, at this point I can just hit enter. All three fields are entered. It will write my story. And now at this point, enter isn't working. But we could set, when I go to this screen, when I go to the output panel, I could set the focus on again, allowing me to hit enter once more. Otherwise, I can tab to it and hit enter, and it brings me back the same as if I clicked on it. So now, under write story, I can now take my again button and set the focus on that. So now, write my story. Oh, pressed it one too many times. Still picking up. So when I hit return to write the story, it's still picking up that. So if I go here, submit, now because that's focused, it immediately goes back. But if I go to here and hit submit, because it happens so quickly that it still is then triggering off a second key down event, making that happen. Again, because of the registering the event is still registering because the key is down while the screen changes, because it doesn't just register once and that's it. So between key down and key up, that's not going to work to have it focus like that. So we will get rid of that. Now we're here. Can tab over to it and keep entering it in. So we've been able to change the focus. We've been able to check what's written. Been able to check the key that's being pressed. So these are good options as part of it. At the list of cursor options that we can have, we now are going to change the cursor over the button. So we can do it in a couple of different ways. We can set it directly on the button. We could create a separate style and add that style to the button. We could also set the style property with JavaScript. So all of these are valid ways to go about doing it. So if I want to set it here, we can go to cursor, and I'll see that I have a lot of different cursor options to work with. So probably the more common one that I would choose while I would be doing this would be a pointer. So now if I save this, I can see I get the hand or pointer when I go over that button. So that would be an easy way to go about doing that. Both buttons have it since they're both buttons. So we can do that through the CSS. Inside the JavaScript, I could take my button, could go submit style cursor is equal to, and let's go see what was another option. I'm going to just choose cell just for fun. And now when I put my mouse over it, you'll see the JavaScript has overridden the CSS that was already there. When I put the cursor over it, we see that change happening. But that's only going to be on the submit button because I did not apply it to the again button. I only applied the style directly here. So we could set the class name. We could add to the class list of the object. We can set the style property directly. All those are ways to do it in JavaScript. Or I can just apply the property directly inside my CSS. How you choose to go about doing it will depend on your kind of project moving forward.